Minecraft doesn't feel very magical. There are a lot of videos on YouTube that talk about ways that Minecraft can be improved. Often they talk about the tech tree of the game, exploration, more content, and expanded gameplay. Personally, I think there's something of much greater importance that the game needs to focus on, and I have yet to see anyone else talk about it. So today we are going to talk about how Minecraft needs to lean into its magic and fantasy aspects and become a true fantasy game. Now don't get me wrong, there are plenty of things in Minecraft that are fantasy. Things such as the obvious presence of magic in the game, weapon enchanting, potions, portals, experience, pretty much the entire nether and end dimensions, also add to that fantasy feeling. But the same can't be said for most things found in the Overworld. This is especially true when looking at the Overworld's mobs, terrain, and building materials. So let's take some time and look at each of these different aspects and see if we can't make them a bit more fantasy based. The Overworld has the largest number of mobs, and some of them fit perfectly within the idea of a fantasy game. The zombie, skeleton, and giant spiders are all based on creatures that are very commonly found in fantasy games, from RuneScape to Skyrim to Dungeons & Dragons. I do have some issues with them, we'll probably talk about that in its own video, but the mobs I want to focus on are the ones that are simply Minecraft versions of real-world creatures. To start out, I don't really have any issue with the farm animals. The cows, chickens, sheep, they fit. But then you have mobs like polar bears, dolphins, turtles, pandas, and so on. These mobs seem like they were mostly added to inform players about real-world animals. They don't really add much interaction with the player, and mostly just fill space. The actual issue I have with these is that they ground Minecraft to feel more like our world, instead of pushing the game towards a fantasy setting. They also play a role of filler in these biomes, which leave less room for more unique mobs. Without polar bears, there could be something else that plays a similar role and takes its place. We could see this is true by looking at the mobs like the creaking. The creaking wasn't added to an already existing biome. Instead, a new biome needed to be made just to fit it. If major biomes weren't already clogged with filler mobs, the creaking could have easily been added to those existing locations. Maybe as an ice elemental in a snowy biome, or as a bamboo spirit in a bamboo forest. I do think adding the creaking was the right move though. I just think that if the major biomes didn't have these real-world filler mobs, Mojang would be more inclined to fill those spaces with unique fantasy mobs. It's also true that many of these things could exist together, but Mojang doesn't really work that way. They're much more likely to add mobs to biomes that don't have anything, or simply make a new biome specific to a mob. So if these filler mobs never existed, what kind of mobs could have been added instead? Great question. I'll be making videos about that in the future though. Otherwise, this video would be about 10 times longer. But do look out for those videos in the future. Next, let's talk about Minecraft's terrain. In the base game, there's been a powerful effort towards normalizing the terrain. As time has gone on, the terrain has started to reflect the real world more and more. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's not a good thing either. A more normalized world makes exploration less interesting. There are still weird things you can find, but it's nothing like it used to be. Plus, there are only a few biomes I would even consider fantasy biomes. There should be much weirder, unique terrain types that lean into a fantasy of discovery. Personally, the best idea to fix this would be to allow a greater variety the further from spawn you go. That way, players who want a more normal experience can have that close to spawn. This could even tie into the game's lore and generation mechanics. Currently, strongholds spawn in rings that radiate outwards from zero. Maybe strangeness could too. As strangeness increases, biomes could push toward more fantastical forms. It would be kind of like what used to happen with the Farlands, but in more deliberate and intended ways. Another option would be tying strangeness to going north or south, keeping the center line of the world normal. You could even build lore around that. The further north or south you go, the fewer villages you could find, suggesting that villagers know about the strangeness and avoid it. This could extend to dungeons as well. Maybe increase dungeon spawns or mob spawns as strangeness increases. It would add so much life to the world and make travel exciting again. Of course, simply adding more types of biomes would also be a great option. The Pale Garden is a great example. Adding even more fantastical biomes could do wonders. An autumn forest biome, a glowing forest biome, a living rocks biome, a poison cloud biome. Honestly, there are a million ideas made by modders already, and another million ideas that haven't even been thought of yet. Using both strategies, new biomes and a strangeness system, would obviously be the best move. Oh, and just a small nitpick, biomes need to be way bigger. It's super weird that traveling just 1,000 blocks can take you through 10 different biomes. It's another way the game kinda disincentivizes traveling. The last thing that hurts Minecraft's fantasy feeling is the reliance on real-world materials and objects. This mostly comes up with how Minecraft treats tools, materials, and tree types. When looking at the tool materials, they try to follow real-world analogs. Here I think they should have just ignored the real world entirely and focus purely on fantasy materials that have unique characteristics. As it stands, only netherite tools have any real uniqueness, being able to survive lava. The others are just a simple linear progression. Wood tools to stone tools to iron tools to diamond tools. You switch immediately because they don't offer anything interesting other than unlocking the next step. Diamond is iconic and would be hard to change, but even just calling it something else could have added a lot to the game feel of it. I think back when the game was smaller, the tool progression wasn't thought out much. It was just a simple mechanic in a simple game. But now, Minecraft is the biggest game of all time. If they focused on making their own fantasy materials, they could be way more creative with what tools and weapons could do. You can actually see this a little with netherite. When freed from real-world restrictions, they made something a little more unique, but they didn't go far enough, probably because the older materials were holding them back. They didn't want to stray too far from what was already established. The same thing with their trees. Minecraft trees have always been real-world analogs. Oak, birch, spruce, and so on. They don't really experiment with size, shape, or fantastical elements either, just minor texture swaps and small tweaks. The only times that they stray away are with the nether trees, the chorus plants, and the pale garden trees. And even then, they still stick pretty close to the real world forms. The nether trees are a better example of what Mojang could be doing. More alien textures, different forms, more imagination. If they just stopped grounding themselves so much in reality, the game could feel so much more magical. There are a dozen other issues I have with how Minecraft handles its fantasy elements, and I'll likely be talking about those and more in the future. Think of this as the first episode of a handful I'm planning. I'll be going into various biome-specific mobs that should be replaced with something more fantasy-inspired too. Ultimately, if I were in charge, I'd implement another layer into the world generation, based on distance, cardinal direction, or a noise map, that adds a strangeness stat, gradually changing trees, textures, mobs, and materials the further you go. Along with that, just adding more exotic materials, trees, and biomes would go a long way toward making Minecraft feel like the fantasy game it deserves to be.